By the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered. Artificial intelligence will play a critical role in how Americans of all ages learn new skills, consume information, and navigate their daily lives. Americans will require reliable outputs from AI, but when ideological biases or social agendas are built into AI models, they can distort the quality and accuracy of the output.
One thing everyone seems to be agreed upon is that AI needs some sort of regulatory framework. What that framework is, that's a bit more vague. Everyone has their own ideas. Publishers, they want to make sure their works cannot be used to train new AI models without respect to their copyright. Security experts, they worry about how models might be directed to help hackers and terrorists and revolutionaries. Accelerationists, those are folks impatient for the future. They want AI to simply gamble forth unconstrained by any limits whatsoever, because that way, they reckon, we'll get to where we're going faster. It's just that no one seems to know where that is. The doomers, they want to pull the plug immediately before AI rises up to kill us all, which seems, well, more Terminator than ground truth. And governments want to be careful. They don't want to kill a goose that they have been promised will lay an infinite supply of golden eggs. Approaches vary. As a whole, Europe errs on the side of caution. Until the U.S. took a bit of a turn earlier this year, it had been a world leader looking for a middle way between overregulation and full-throttle pedal-to-the-metal accelerationism. Now, priorities have changed. Their main goal is to do everything to block woke AI. But there's a problem here. Those same constraints that make these models woke are the very same ones that make them safe for folks to use. Remove all the constraints. No one except the accelerationists thinks that's a good idea. So everyone wants to regulate AI, but does anyone have any idea how? G'day, I'm Mark Pesce. The coming next billion seconds will be the most transformative in human history. The arrival of AI looms as one big reason that will prove true. Over the course of this mini-series, we're doing a deep dive, delving into the nuts and bolts of artificial intelligence. Is it really that amazing, or is it all just hype? In our excitement, are we losing sight of the other meaning of AI, that it's always imperfect? That's the title for this miniseries, because as good as it is, and it's far better than it was 3 years ago, it still has a long way to go. And given that it does have such a long way to go, is it too early to think about regulating AI, or is this such a big deal that it would be dangerous to wait? That's the question we're accelerating into on this episode of The Next Billion Seconds. So, what even is AI? I mean, if you're going to try to regulate something, you have to know what you're regulating. The thing is, there's this wonderful quote from computer scientist John Conway, and he was one of the original 8 individuals at the 1956 Dartmouth workshop on artificial intelligence, and that was the first time that term had been used. It's the starting point for the field. In the 1990s, John Conway was heard to remark,
"As soon as it works, no one calls it AI anymore."
That's very much the case. A decade ago, data analytics was known as AI. Why? Because it used pattern recognition and other techniques in a bit of applied artificial intelligence. And when it was new and shiny, people called it AI. And when it got boring and stable, it became data analytics. And now no one really notices it at all. It's just the way things work. So when we say we want to regulate AI, what are we really saying? Is it a fantasy of control? Or is it a real need to rein in breakaway horses? Kate Carruthers has been studying the global AI regulatory landscape for the past few years. It's the topic of a PhD thesis she's currently at work on at the University of Technology, Sydney. So she's well equipped to answer some of these thorny questions. Kate, welcome to the Next Billion Seconds.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Mark.
All right, let's start with some basics in the context of what's going on today with regulation. Is there even any agreement on what AI is?
No, there is deep disagreement about what AI is, and there is no generally accepted definition. Everybody means a different thing by it. And when you look at all the different regulations around the world, they're clearly talking about different bits of the concept as well.
So it's kind of a five blind men and an elephant's thing, right? Where they're all touching different parts of the beast and they're all saying, oh, well, let's regulate this bit.
Mm.
Okay, if that's the case, at least give us a sense of what's happening globally with AI regulation.
Well, actually, I might just hark back to some work that I did with the Global Data Commissioners over the last decade, because what there was from my Australian orientation was the US to the far right of this. They want all data to be free. All the companies there want unfettered access to everybody's data for money and profit. And then there was the EU at the other side of the regulatory regime where they want to lock down data and not make it available to anybody with an excess of regulation, some might think. And then there was the rest of us sort of in the middle, trying to find some middle way between those two extreme positions. And lo and behold, those positions seem to have carried over into the world of AI.
All right. So we had a big confab in England, I think it was just last year, right, where Rishi Sunak was still prime minister, I guess, so it must have been early last year, where lots of people flew in for this confab about basically getting on the same page with AI regulations. Has anything come of that?
Not on a global basis, because everybody else is still going off and doing their own thing. So the world has largely fallen into those three groups that I mentioned previously that they've always been in. And every country is taking a kind of different approach.
I guess this begs the next question, which is AI is not particularly zoned globally, right? It's coming off of something in a cloud, and who knows where the cloud is, and it's going into a smartphone, and who knows where the smartphone is. So it's probably always international, which means even regulatory frameworks that are agreed to at a nation state level are never going to be quite adequate. Maybe you could do something that would be useful across all of the EU as long as it only dealt with things in the EU. So if you can't get nations to agree, is there any international hope of agreement?
Well, I think with the way that the US is going, they are very focused on their AI being able to do whatever the corporates want them to do and not to have too many restrictions on it, apart from stopping it from being woke, whatever that means. And the rest of the world is starting to wake up to the fact that some reasonable kind of regulation will be necessary for the future of good lives for human beings going forward. So I'm seeing a big rift in the world between those two attitudes. And even China is in the camp where they say some regulation is necessary and good. So it's really the US and everybody else. But some people more extreme in their desire for regulation than others, obviously.
Now, it's interesting. I always read quite a bit of the tech press very early in the morning before I get out of bed. And this morning, I read in the tech press a report about Anthropic basically turning down U.S. government requests for their AI to be used in some defense situations and in some surveillance situations. So Anthropic, which is seen as and promotes itself as a highly ethical purveyor of AI, is in fact self-regulating around this and is incurring the wrath of the U.S., who doesn't want it regulated at all. Is this something that we're going to see, where actually the commercial firms involved will back away from a free-for-all accelerationist sort of attitude?
Well, I think the Americans are really in a highly accelerationist way. I think the other thing that's happening with every other country is people are starting to realize their sovereign risk with consuming AI that is created and run out of a country, in a country, and for a country. And I think this is part of the politics is playing out about TikTok at the moment with the US.
And we saw exactly the same thing with DeepSeek. Everyone was having a lot of fun playing with it. But then I remember when the email went out to all the Sydney University staff to take it off of all university machines and all university phones. And the Commonwealth has cracked down on it. I think the state governments have also cracked down on it because there's a fear that data is going to end up in China in ways that it wouldn't with, say, ChatGPT or with Anthropic.
Well, I think it will really depend on the platform and how close they get with the US government. And this is why I mentioned TikTok. So the announcement came that they're going to spin off the US version of TikTok. The US government wants a US government representative to be on the board.
Wow, that's just like the Chinese were wanting a Chinese Communist Party representative on the board.
Precisely. So the thing is, while the US is saying that they don't want regulation on AI, they are clearly wanting control over it, and they're seeing control as a strategic national imperative. And this is why there are a number of people that are working on the idea of sovereign AI in Australia, in Singapore, all around the world, really.
And I know Simon Chris, whom I know vaguely, is making a big effort toward raising a fund, I think $10 million, to be able to train a sovereign AI. I personally wonder if there's value in that versus having open models such as the Swiss have just done, right? The Swiss have just generated that and put it all out there. And so that you can see all of their training data as well, which is one of the things that tends to be very not transparent about this. So does it make sense for countries to develop their own models, or does it make sense more for them to have models that they can inspect, that are transparent, that they can trust?
Well, it depends which country you are. So I'm going to say that the US will be very firmly in the camp of it's proprietary. We don't want to show anybody, but hey, we've got our government people on their boards of directors and they've just made Intel give them a stake and all of this stuff. So the US is moving to a high control, low legislation world, and other countries are going in a slightly different direction. Full disclosure, I'm on Simon's advisory board.
All right. It's good to know that, because there are questions around sovereignty that are legitimate, and then there are questions around sovereignty. Well, we're just going to do it because everyone else is doing it, right? That it's a FOMO sort of sovereignty. And how do we know which side? How do we make a good decision around that?
I think the thing that you were alluding to earlier is the transparency about models and training data is really imperative. For even if you are doing a sovereign AI. And I think the Swiss model is really interesting. I was having a look at the other night. And I think that is a good way. But the other thing is the Chinese because the Chinese are constrained with their access to chips, it's forcing them down an innovation path that's making them innovate with how AI works and making it much more efficient and effective. So it's actually really interesting, some of the pressures that are driving the industry in different and interesting directions.
Right. We do have to admit, and this goes back to our series Geopolitics that we did 2 years ago, where we talked about the global semiconductor landscape and as a US versus China thing, really before things got quite as heated as they are now, that denying China access to chips has forced its AI companies to solve problems in software that American companies that just have all the chips to solve their problems have never needed to solve because they've never hit a resource wall.
The other thing that's really, really interesting, because in the US, when they announced their recent executive order where they talked about woke AI, their war on woke AI, they also were talking about their AI skills initiative. But in parallel with that, they're going to defund the education department. They've got a war on universities. They don't graduate very many engineering graduates in comparison to key competitors like China. So I'm just wondering where all these people who have AI skills are going to come from in the US world view. Like, where are they going to find them?
So there's really a lot of dimensions here. You know, when you open the door to regulation, you're actually opening the Pandora's box of the geopolitics of AI. So let's talk about Australia. And we just had, so Tim Ayres, who's the Minister for Industry, just this week declared in a speech, and the speech was given to the Tech Council, which is kind of the tech majors in Australia all sitting together. He said, look, there's an appetite for further regulation of artificial intelligence to ensure that it's used responsibly in the national interest. We will be squarely focused on building the capability to deal with risks and to act effectively to deal with bad actors and malign applications of this technology. Can they do that, Kate?
Well, how would they know? How would they know that that was even happening? So it's an admirable motherhood statement to make, but literally, how would the government know this, that this is even happening? How can they tell?
I mean, I've drawn back to the report that aired on the ABC on Election Day, on the federal election day, about the Pravda Australia site that was seeding articles into Australia's information stream in the knowledge that they would be digested by large language models being trained and would then spit out fake facts because they'd been trained on what they thought were real news articles. And that's exactly what we're talking about. When we're talking about bad actors and malign, they become embedded in the systems as part of the propaganda and influence process. How can we be sure of those things?
Well, it means that we as a nation need to update our threat model. So our cyber threat model needs to evolve to include AI. And I actually spoke at CREST conference, which is a cyber conference in Canberra, this time last year, talking to a bunch of cyber professionals about all the ways that AI is vulnerable to hacking. And after the session, a whole bunch of people came up to me and said, this wasn't even on my radar. I had no idea. So, it was really, really straightforward things like, prompt injections, poisoning the source, all of those sort of things. But literally these cyber professionals didn't have that on their radar as part of their threat model. So people's threat models need to evolve, and pretty quickly.
All right, Kate, final question. Is this whole regulation Gordian knot just going to grind on without any real resolution? Or are we going to see substantial moves to regulate AI, even if no one can actually agree on what it is they're regulating?
Oh, I think people are going to regulate it. So I think the world is literally going to be split into 2 or 3 universes. So there will be the US universe, and it'll just be them on their own, because nobody wants to do what they're planning to do, because nobody cares about woke AI apart from them. Probably when Farage becomes PM in the UK, they'll join the US, but, nobody else. And then the rest of us, with probably the EU trying to regulate fairly heavily, and the rest of us somewhere in the middle trying to do something globally. And really interestingly, China have been making moves to be sort of the reasonable voice in the global leadership space of AI. So I do think that they will start to group that middle group of countries and start shepherding them and being a good global corporate citizen for the future, which is an interesting world.
The non-aligned block of AI regulators. Kate, thank you so much for joining us on The Next Billion Seconds.
Lovely to have been here.
Artificial intelligence has become a political battleground. Regulation acts as one way partisans get to publicly demonstrate their political beliefs, and in that, it comes back to the big through line of this series. AI is a mirror. If we look into it and see nirvana or doom, what does that tell us about ourselves? That's where we've got to start, because it's going to be very difficult to regulate artificial intelligence until we can get some sort of handle on ourselves. In the final episode of this miniseries, we'll take a look at the specter haunting every knowledge worker. Will AI put us all out of work? Is there any way to avoid that? Can we build resistance to being automated into oblivion? That's on the next episode of The Next Billion Seconds. The Next Billion Seconds was written and presented by Mark Pesce. Big thanks to Kate Carruthers for joining us. The Next Billion Seconds is produced by Medium Productive. Our show was mixed by Luke Cramp, executive producer Josh Butt. If you like our show, please remember to follow us on your favorite podcasting app. And if you know someone who might be interested in these topics, please share our show with them. This is Mark Pesce, thanking you for listening.